Hello, everybody. So I'm Ted Williams, for those of you guys who do not know, and I do a series of political commentary pieces. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna get myself together here. I do a series of political commentary pieces that are on the, I guess, on the edge, the intersection, if you will, of faith and politics. I'm a person that is a firm believer that you should all of us ought to be engaged in the political process. Some people are people of faith that do that. Some people are people who are not of faith, but every one of us has a role to play in our society in terms of making it greater. And so today, I just want to take a few minutes to talk about not only the recent case of police brutality that has occurred in Minnesota, which I know that so many people are talking about today, but the overall question of justice and what that looks like and what that means, particularly for people who are hopefully people who are looking to have faith in their lives. And so I'm actually going to, those of you guys who don't know me, I teach political science in the City Colleges of Chicago. I've written actually 2 books about politics and the intersection between religion and politics. I've run for office and a variety of other things in the space. I've also worked in ministry for many, many years. Having run a church, have a ministry now, a virtual house church ministry that we're doing, and have an artistic background as well, and so do plays in that space as well. And so I want to take a moment, if you guys bear with me, I know not everyone's a believer in that sort of thing, but I want to take a moment to put some biblical context on what happened today in this case, what happens consistently in government around the issues of inequality, and what we ought to be doing. And I want to look at that from not only a spiritual perspective, but a constitutional and legal perspective, because I am a firm believer in the political process here in this country and around the world. And so I want to just take a few minutes to do that. And so if you bear with me, just stay with me for a second here. So we look at this parable in the book of Luke. Luke chapter 18, we're going to look at. And the parable is the parable of the unjust judge. And in that parable, it says this, in verse 1, it says, and Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them they should always pray and never give up. He said, in a certain town, there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared what people thought. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, grant me justice against my adversary. For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, even though I don't fear God or care what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice so she will not eventually come and attack me. And the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says, and will not God bring justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, you will see that they get justice, and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? This passage is very interesting because the judge that we learn about in this passage had 2 qualities that I think are very critical when you look at leadership in the world. Number one, it says this judge did not fear God. He had no fear of anything higher than him. At one point in America, there was a religious test that allowed people to either be put in office or not put in office based on their beliefs. Now, I'm not suggesting we should have that today, but I am suggesting that there ought to be something that is said about people's characters and what they respect and what they're afraid of and what they are committed to in their individual and their personal lives. And one of the ways that we ought to be choosing leadership is when we see leaders who do not have any respect for anything higher than them, it ought to give us a clear indication, if you will, of the way that they may potentially treat us. The second part of this says that he did not had no respect for people, or he did not care what people thought. Scripturally, this passage actually does not just mean that he didn't care what people thought, but essentially it is translated into this man had no public shame. Now, if you're like me, you're thinking about leaders that we have right now that had no public shame and no fear of God in terms of what they do and not do. And I'm not here to talk about you know who right now, okay? Although we could talk about that as well. But I am here to say that when someone is in a position of power and they do not have a sense of shame, they can do a lot of damage to a lot of people. See, I am a firm believer that you can be a person that believes and prays and supports and is patriotic and all those things, and still hold our government leaders, hold them accountable, hold their feet to the fire. This is our job as citizens in a democracy. In America, we are asked every 2 years and every 4 years who we think ought to run the country and how. I don't think there's anything wise, faithful, Christian-like, intelligent about saying, I don't know, I don't care. When we don't have good leadership, people who respect other people's lives, i.e., Black Lives Matter, we don't have that in our country, then we see injustice after injustice after injustice. The gentleman today in Minnesota, if you guys saw the case, if you guys saw the video where the gentleman was on the ground and he had been detained, and we don't know what happened beforehand. We know that potentially he was resisting arrest and he was engaged in a bunch of other things. Okay, that is potentially true. I mean, in all honesty, the guy could have pulled a gun on the cops before that, and we wouldn't know. And yet, what we picked up in the video was that he was down, he was detained, and the man's knee was on his neck, and ultimately he killed him. And so, as a result, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, hey everybody, see you guys all popping in. Bear with me, I'm on a bit of a rant here, but I hope this is helpful to you all. As we see that there, we see a very clear situation of injustice. I read all the comments and all of the various political pieces. I read a bunch of different news stories, news outlets every day. And there is almost universal agreement here from conservatives and liberals, from white people, Black people, rich people, and poor, that this was an example of excessive use of force. And so we see this very clearly, and we see this consistently happening in America. America is not unique in terms of having injustice in its political system, its police force. It's not unique. There's injustice all around the world. In fact, many people argue that there's more injustice depending on which countries you go to. But the difference between America and other countries is America claims on paper that all men are created equal. America claims on paper to be a place where justice rules not people's socioeconomic background, not their race, not their ethnicity, not their class. And so when we see injustice in America, it makes us even more angry, because this is a place where we hope beyond hope that we would not experience that. That's why somebody like a Colin Kaepernick would protest back to that situation again, because America, we believe we are better than that. And in many ways, we may not be, but I don't think that it is unpatriotic for us to examine these things, to push these things, to hold people accountable for what they do, whether you are a person of faith or not a person of faith. Justice is crucial in any society. With no justice, there is no peace. And so when we look at this case, the unjust judge, it says that this woman who kept coming to the judge, she was a persistent widow, and she kept coming to him because she had experienced injustice with her adversary. She had been cheated out of money, and she kept coming to him and coming to him and coming to him. And this judge, being as unjust as he was, ultimately acquiesced because of her persistence. Why do I say that to you, ladies and gentlemen? Because in the midst of a time where we see injustice after injustice, I still believe that we can have hope if we engage in this process and we do not give up. There is something to be said for trying to still have hope and still have faith in the midst of all of this. Let me share with you guys a couple of statistics around American police brutality and injustice and inequality, because I think it's important to put this in context. And then I want to talk about what we can do solution-wise in terms of public policy and what we can do in our hearts. So, number one, in 2019, there were 370 people who were of Caucasian descent murdered by the police in the United States. 235 African Americans, 158 Hispanic Americans, and 202 unknown people. People of Native American descent are as likely as people of African descent to be killed by the police. People who are of color are 2 times more likely to be killed by the police than those who are not of color. That includes Native Americans and Hispanics. And last but not least, in terms of convictions around these things, police officers have a conviction rate of around 1%. And citizens, in the regular citizens, have a conviction rate of over 80%. And so what you see in these statistics is you see a very clear disparity between people who are citizens, who are engaged in activities that cause them, other people to die in their conviction, and those who are so supposed to serve and protect. Yes, it is more critical that the people who are hired to serve and protect respect our lives. Now, I'm not suggesting that in America there are there are 14,000 murders by handgun every year in this country. The vast majority of people that die in this country don't die at the hands of the police. We know this. But with the police, we expect better. With the government authorities, we want better, we demand better, we expect better. And that is why people get so upset about it. It does not negate all of these other issues that exist. But what it does do is it says to us that we cannot even believe in those that we are supposed to have serve us and protect us. Now, I have to make this disclaimer. I hate that I have to do this, but the reality is whenever you're having this conversation in our political world, you have to say this, and I believe this fully. I've got lots of friends and family who are police officers who do the right thing. But the problem is, guys, it only takes a few. It only takes a few bad apples to ruin a whole bunch. And I think this is a larger question, not just of police brutality, but of corruption in leadership in general. As you saw the parable I just mentioned, this parable describes a leader that had no fear of God and had no shame in their behavior, did not care what other people thought about their behavior. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think you have to look very far to see leadership like that in America. I think it's very clear that we have many people in positions of authority all the way up to the top who represent that. However, I think that as citizens, we have to not just be mad, but we have to move. We have to not just be angry, but we've got to organize. We've got to think about what we can do. There are a few solutions that have worked, if you will, around this nation, around police brutality, around political corruption, things like gerrymandering and things like gerrymandering, which keeps popping into my head. I don't know why. If you guys know about gerrymandering, it is a process by which the people in office, they draw up their own districts and then they pick and choose their voters. This happens all over America, not in every state. California is one of the few states that does not allow them to do it. But these are the kind of things that politicians are doing right now to stay in office. And this is as unjust as this police brutality issue as well. So what do? We get angry. We understand this. We should get angry. We should be mad. How could you not be mad when you see injustice? I don't think that there's anything good or moral about people who are passive when it comes to injustice. I think that it is not a virtue. I believe it was Malcolm X who said this, that it is no virtue to be moderate in the face of injustice. Injustice, folks, is something that we ought to all be fighting. But at the end of the day, what can we do? A couple policy solutions, and I want to talk about the heart, and then I'm going to take some comments, and I'm going to get off of this thing. But first of all, there is the legislation around the country that is demanding body cams for police officers everywhere. If localities do not have this, this must be put into effect immediately, because this is the only way that we are able to hold the police officers and other people in authority accountable. The Declaration of Independence says that the government is ultimately set up for us, and when that government does not protect our rights, it is the right of the people to overthrow that government and to put in place a government that will then respect its rights. The overthrowing process we have is called voting, folks, and we can move people out. We can hold them accountable. These are the powers that we have. Number two, civilian oversight boards. If your locality does not have a civilian oversight board for the police, you ought to call your alderman, your city councilman, your congressman, your state representative, your state legislator, your governor, and demand and say that we want civilian oversight. Last but not least, I want to say for the police on this, we ought to consider limiting the amount of statutes they are required to enforce anyway. Think about this. In our country, if someone speeds or if someone does something that is, whatever, they got a tail light that's out or they have an expired license plate, we create this situation of hostility in which the police officer pulls someone over in a very embarrassing manner, walks up to them, whether at night with a flashlight in their eyes, etc., in a very intimidating and scary manner, And then we set up these situations of conflict, and then they go awry. Why does this happen? Are there not other ways that we can deal with some of our non-lethal, non-threatening, non-violent civilian infractions around traffic that would not require this kind of setup and stage confrontation? I think that in the year 2020, we have to be able to find the technology to do that. And in the year 2020, we've got to be able to protect people in that way, because it is very scary if we do not. And so the scripture that we read, back to this notion of faith, says in the end that God will grant us justice, by the way, that justice does come. I am grateful. I'm angry that it took the media to get these police officers fired, but I'm grateful that we live in a country where at least there's some sense of shame, maybe not by the police in that case, but maybe by the mayor, maybe by the governor, maybe by someone, and someone's held accountable. Just like this case, if you saw in New York in Central Park, where the woman uses race to call the police on this guy who is just bird watching. And she says that I'm going to use your race to kind of get the police on my side and threaten you and that sort of thing. And it was awful. And it is an example of the sort of racial superiority that lives under the surface of American society. It's just right here. And I've written about this on my blog, BibleBallot.com. I write a lot about these issues. You can go check it out if you want. But that case was awful as well. And yet I found out the woman was just fired. I found out these police officers were fired. I found out that police are being convicted of these things. There are now, I would suggest, in certain areas, God knows we need so much more with our politicians, but there have been some examples of victory in this area, so we have to have hope. What Christ says at the very end of this passage is that when I come back, will I find faith on this earth? Yes, if you are persistent, we will get justice. We got to keep on fighting, folks. I'm a fighter. I believe in fighting for justice, and we have to write, we have to organize, we have to persuade, we have to run for office, we have to get engaged, but we have to keep faith. And we have to keep hope, because if we do not, we become as bad as the people who are committing injustice. I think the power of the civil rights movement was that it was a moral movement. The power of the civil rights movement was that it was a movement of faith. The power of the civil rights movement was that it was a movement of love, and the people, even though they were fighting evil, they fought that evil with the right heart so that their hearts were not corrupted, as Dr. King argued. And so we need to be mad. We need to be upset, but we need to organize. And as we organize, then we need to have hope, and we need to push, and we need to not let ourselves be corrupted by the evil around us, that we keep faith. He asked if we find faith on this earth. If we keep faith, we keep hope, and we keep love, we can change the world, brothers and sisters. And so it's critical for us that we recognize this. I think the lesson from history is so powerful. It is so, so powerful. Justice will come. We'll be hopeful and we'll be faithful as we do it. Let's fight, folks. Let's hold people accountable. Fight in your local legislature. Don't just think about the police brutality issue. We ought to be just as mad about the poverty that exists in this country. We ought to be just as mad about the inequality in our schools in this country. We ought to be just as mad about the way we're destroying the environment in this country. We ought to be just as mad about the issue of healthcare in this country. We ought to be just as mad about the fact that we have a stimulus plan in this country that is only hitting a few people, and there are people who are falling through the cracks. We ought to be just as mad that people live in conditions where they are looking for options, and their options, the easiest options, are drugs and gangs and violence, and the way that we deal with them is just to run away from them and blame them, and instead of changing the conditions under which they live. These are issues of inequality that are existing even before and after some person uses their power to kill someone. We got to fight for those things too. Thank you guys for this. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to read a couple comments and we're going to keep, I'm going to get out of here. Maxie says, it looks like murder. It's not manslaughter or excessive force. The cop knew he was killing the man. He was saying, I can't breathe. You're right, Mac. I mean, it was pretty simple. Katrina says, we have to hold people accountable. We have to expose. We have to deliver, or we are just as guilty. I love that. I love it. I love it. I made a post today that said that Donald Trump, oops, I said it. Sorry. Maybe the president that we deserve, because he's a perfect reflection of the racism, xenophobia, misogyny, selfishness, materialism, rudeness, immorality, godlessness, all those things in American culture. He is a perfect reflection of those. And maybe he's not an anomaly, but maybe he's a mirror on our society to tell us how we are. I love what Katrina just said, because the truth is that we can sit and we can judge, but if we don't do anything in any way, shape, or form, I'm talking about voting, I'm talking about writing, I'm talking about praying, I'm talking about informing, I'm talking about educating. If we don't do those things, then we become culpable as well. Thank you for that comment. Keep hope alive. I love that, Simone. You're right. Hey, everybody who said hello. I probably have more comments in there, but I can't see them now. Thank you guys. Have a great day, and let's continue to fight. I hope that you all stay hopeful and faithful, and I hope you stay engaged. Once again, contact your congressman, contact your legislator. You can be engaged in really changing the world. I've got a couple things that I do here, a couple books and that sort of thing, guys. Check out the website. We've got a couple events coming up on Juneteenth, 1619. We are doing that again, and got some new stuff on our website. So check out thebibleballot.com for more writing on this, and Ted Williams III for some of the events coming up. Thank you, guys. Let's continue to encourage one another, and let's continue to have hope. Let's continue to fight for justice and what is right in our society, because our world is full of darkness, but it's better to light a candle than it is to continue just to curse it. Have a great day. Take care.